Hello, I'm Dawn, and welcome to That Service Dog Show. I know I do not do a lot of videos right now. I've had a lot of issues going on. In fact, I was recently in the hospital. It's been about a month now, so the scar has gone down. But I won't make a lot of excuses. I will go ahead and I will tell you if you need to reach out to me, you're welcome to reach out to me on X under That Service Dog Show. Yahoo.com is That Service Dog Show. And I'm also on Facebook, same name. Please, if you have comments, questions, just like I always do, I will reach out to you directly. And if I think that a video should be made and I'm actually able to make the video, I will also make that video, but I will not use your name, just as I've not really used the names of those in the past. So, with that being said, there is a bit of information that I had gotten that I had planned to have a video made with an individual regarding letters for assistance animals. Now, the recording actually fell through, but the information is still very important. This past week, I was actually reminded of just how important that information is by a comment that was placed in one of the multiple groups that I help administrate on Facebook. So I'm going to actually read my post and make a few comments about it. As I feel it's needed, and I'm sorry, normally I try to be a little bit more composed, but it's just a weird time right now. So, anyway, here it goes. After commenting on a post in another group, I figured that I'd best make a separate post to make it more accessible for those who need to read this, or in your case, hear this. The subject is why medical or mental health providers don't write assistance animal letters as often as they once did. It was mentioned by another that they would be held responsible for the animal and be sued, such as after a bite. This is a very common misconception, both with providers as well as patients. So this is why I've actually addressed this in this post. This is false. The only way that a provider would face any legal recourse would be if they are writing letters without their patient being disabled by their conditions, since that is a prerequisite to have an emotional support animal. Or writing for more animals than they need for their disability, because it would fall into medical malpractice and aiding in fraud. Now, for the numbers regarding ESAs, this would be I have 3 cats. One of them is my ESA. Why do you need your 3rd cat if you already have 2? Would be a very reasonable question for either a medical provider or a landlord to ask. That very much looks suspicious. As far as the medical provider needing to make sure that they're disabled, this is one reason why, when discussing for this podcast, for an episode that fell through, it was explained that one reason that many are denied but are told that they cannot write the letter is to remove the blame off of them, since they don't want any conflict with the patient while informing them they just don't agree with the patient's self-diagnosis of needing an emotional support animal. Their notes over time wouldn't reflect their need over the course of the relationship with the patient, which is why it's so important to be fully frank with the provider long, and I do mean long, before broaching the subject of an emotional support animal in the first place. That is one reason why the providers need to have an established relationship with the patient prior to writing the letter. Now, in most states, that is a minimum of a 30-day relationship before the ESA is broached. Some states I have been contacted by individuals in the past stating that their state says that a medical relationship must be established for at least 6 months. I do not recall off the top of my head which state that was whenever someone reached out to me, whenever I was administrating, and I quoted the 30 days, and they sent a private message saying, just let you know, my state at 6 months. So minimum is 30 days, but make sure you look at your own state's minimum requirements because there are some that will have a longer stretch before you can even broach the subject of having a letter written for an emotional support animal. All right. As I've stated, this is one reason why the provider needs to have an established relationship with the patient prior to writing the letter. This way, should the medical board do an audit of their records, which they never know when that's going to happen. So it's not like you can plan for it. It's one of those things that may never happen, and then some providers may have it happen every other year. So it really is a lottery system. It's not meant to make it where you know when you're getting your letters and your medical records audited. But it shows that there was something there, that the need for an emotional support animal did not just spring up out of nowhere. That it was just one more treatment of a list of treatments that was tried for the condition. Those other treatments just happened to not work. Because just like with a service dog, an emotional support animal should not be the first treatment plan that is attempted for a condition most of the time. That's a generalized statement. There are some times where it is more of a reasonable thing to go ahead and be like, this is what you need. But in general, that is not the first thing that should be touched upon for a treatment plan. All right. With that said, there are some medical malpractice insurance companies that do prevent their providers from writing letters for assistance animals. Just as with the issue of homeowners insurance, that they do not always cover all breeds or even dogs at all. There are some homeowners insurance that does not cover dogs at all. And then there are many homeowners insurance companies that don't cover certain breeds, or they charge more for those breeds. So that's something to remember whenever you need to get an assistance animal. But remember, writing for an emotional support animal is just a form of a medical or mental health treatment plan. One that's popularity has had a sudden explosion in recent years, which does increase the statistical likelihood of its abuse. That's not always our fault, but insurance companies do have to look at statistics. I mean, they are in a business that is dictated by math. They're not a human based business. This is a business based on how much money can they get based off of what's being covered, and how much money will they have to spend based on what's being covered. How much of the abuse of pain pills affected the ESAs? Probably quite a bit. I mean, I'm sure we all remember that a few years ago, there was a big push to regulate heavily the prescriptions of pain pills. It used to be very easy for people who were chronic pain patients to actually get prescriptions. Now, I can speak on behalf of myself as someone who is a chronic pain patient. I don't get those pills very readily. I'm lucky if I can get 30 for an entire year. And if I have to use more than that, I'm I'm looking forward to some very interesting appointments and meeting certain requirements before I can get those refills. So, much like that abuse exploded in years past and then required laws to become much stricter regarding the issuing of those prescriptions, with the increased popularity of the treatment plan of assistance animals, the same thing kind of has to happen. That scrutiny that went with those medications, so does the same for emotional support animals. Most of the world has already cracked down on the use of emotional support animals. If you were to look at various laws for different countries, most of them do not accept emotional support animals as a valid treatment. Even those that once did, they don't. And for those that do, it is heavily regulated. And much like how the U.S. is supposed to be, they do not have public access. And it is very difficult to even find rental homes that has to accept an emotional support animal. So there are many studies that will be referenced to as the U.S. moves forward. And you may ask, if the doctors are not legally held responsible for the animal, then why are their medical insurance malpractice insurance companies so concerned? Well, here's the thing. There's a lot of overlapping when it comes to the insurance world, meaning that while the insurance company is Mutual Medical Insurance of State X, it may only be a subsidiary of a much larger insurance company, one that actually does broach things like homeowners insurance. So those branches in the homeowners insurance will be affected by their medical malpractice branches. This means that with the increase of the usage of ESAs, the statistical possibility of claims that will have to be paid out also increases. To reduce that statistic, specifically while trying to balance things out after the high number of abuse that is actually still being taken place by fraudulent websites, as well as people who get ESAs for multiple animals, that is very much abusing the system. It's not what it was meant for. That means that in order to counteract the excessive number of ESAs per individuals or fraudulently written letters from websites, the companies that they cover actually have to be prohibited from writing letters, at least until things balance out. And that likely will not change for the foreseeable future, not until laws are updated once more, and HUD actually isn't that old. It was hoped that when the HUD guidelines were updated in 2024, only 4 short years ago, not even a full 4 short years ago yet, it was hoped that it would have spurred a bit of a reset. But the trend of more people continuing to seek out the use of ESAs, both legitimately and illegitimately, has continued to increase. You might even say skyrocket. The insurance companies are using the statistics as well as the studies from the other countries that I mentioned, as well as the fact that many have ceased to offer any protections in the homes for those with them at all, to eventually try to have the U.S. follow suit. Now again, HUD guidelines are only 4 years old, so they're not likely to change them, especially that drastically, just yet. But it is something to think about, that the U.S. is still a very rare country and is getting rarer to accept emotional support animals and even owner-trained service dogs. So owner-trained service dogs are a bit of an abnormality for the United States as well. But the U.S. does tend to look at trends in other countries, and their trends does tend to show what to expect in the future here in the U.S. So, what can you do to move forward with this insight? For one, when you rent, if you know you need an assistance animal, first look at pet-friendly locations, just to be on the safe side, and so that it kind of gives you a little bit of a breath to kind of like, I don't have to really worry too much. Yes, you will still be able to get out of the pet rents and stuff like that whenever you have an assistance animal, but it is better to start there. But whenever you live in a no pet or a limited pet rental, limit your animals to only what you need. This means don't have 4 cats, but 2 of them are your emotional support animals whenever there are only 2 pet limit. That definitely looks like an abuse to anybody looking in. Having more than 1 ESA in a rental is already extremely rare because, in general, the second ESA must do something as part of your treatment plan that the first one can or would not do. And getting a third one is practically impossible whenever I speak with HUD to legally and reasonably be considered acceptable. Now, one thing that I've seen whenever I run multiple pages, 2 of them are about laws, are like, okay, there's 4 of us living in the home, 3 need an emotional support animal. Is this reasonable? Can the landlord decide not to accept all 3? And the answer is yes. 3 ESA animals can easily be considered an unreasonable accommodation, even if they are for 3 separate people. So for something like that, it very much would be considered best to look at pet-friendly locations, especially if this is supposed to be a pet-free area. Things that go into the whether it's reasonable or unreasonable, the number of living beings in the home actually does make a difference. If it's one person living in a rental that's 900 square feet and their doctor writes them a prescription for an ESA dog and a prescription for an ESA cat because they both have different parts of the treatment plan, it would be very difficult to say that's not a reasonable accommodation. But take those 2 same animals, a dog and a cat, into a 900 square foot apartment with 4 adults living in there. That would be a very unreasonable accommodation in general. So sometimes fire codes can even come into it because it's not just a matter of how many people, it's how many heartbeats. With the exception of, maybe something that can be caged. A cat cannot really be caged. A dog cannot really be caged. But a fish is in a tank, or a hamster is in a cage. So I could see that hamster being more of a reasonable pet to be accommodated versus having another dog. Just something to think about whenever you do need to have these ESAs. Just exactly how do you plan to see this? If you were the landlord, knowing that the last time your renter moved out who had pets, that you had to spend $20,000 to remodel, which we're actually going through right now. If that was you, would you consider this to be reasonable, knowing that you're going to have to do that most likely upon the next move out? Just something to think about. However, like I said, limit your animals to what you need. That way you were showing that you are only asking for a reasonable accommodation, trying to avoid even the appearance of abusing the system to be a reasonable accommodation. Very, very important. Because again, we are also living in a world where many are abusing, and while it may not seem fair, we have to take that into account when we make our game plans. Okay, another thing to keep in mind is to keep a paper trail of your need for the animal. Just like long before you get the animal, you need to discuss it with your provider. But after you've gotten your letter, don't let that be the last time they hear about your animal. Make sure that whenever you go in for your checkups, that they hear that you were having such and such a bad day, and Fluffy came, and whenever it came and sat in your lap, it made your day better. Or days where you just feel like you cannot get out of bed, but you know that Sparky has to go out for his walks, and you've realized that that has made it so much easier for you to continue your daily life without seeping into a deep depression. Doctors and mental health providers need to hear that. They need to hear how that animal continues to help you with your medical or mental health issues. They don't need to hear that only whenever it's time to write a new letter. So, again, this may seem unfair, but this is a subject that is neither fair nor unfair. This is an issue that relies heavily on math, which just is. It has no biases, it has no prejudices, math just exists. So, and that means that those of us with assistance animals, we need to work within the boundaries that are a fact of life with them, at least until the laws are once more advocated to be changed one way or another. Again, we have no clue when that'll be. It's only been 4 years since HUD has been updated. It's been over 10 years now since the ADA was updated for public access. I do not foresee HUD being updated anytime soon. If anything, I could see the ADA being the next on the list of being updated, since we have had the DOT's ACAA for flying being updated back in 2020, and HUD updated in 2020. But the last time that the new ADA laws were put into place was 10 years ago. So that's something to think about as well whenever you are looking for assistance animals, is if the ADA is updated, would this be a reasonable thing to keep updated? That's one of the reasons why I do some of the things I do with the training that I have with my dogs, is if things change, will my dogs still be considered service dogs? But that's a video for another day. So anyway, I just wanted to hop on here. I have 3 doctor's appointments next week, so I will not be making any videos next week, but considering how long it's been between videos here lately, I don't think any of you are really going to notice. And again, regardless of where you see this video posted, on X or on YouTube, or you can reach out to me on Facebook for any comments. Like I said, I've actually been doing more of that, the one-on-ones, than the videos, simply because it is just so much easier to just reply directly to the messages rather than recording a video. But this is one that I felt that I needed to do. So until next time, again, my name is Dawn for That Service Dog Show, and I hope to see you again very soon.